Hi guys, this is Mrs. Cager, and the purpose of this video is to help you review and revise the 2.07 unit test. Some of you may not have submitted this yet, so if you have not submitted the 2.09 yet, watch this video first. We're going to walk through what those short answer responses should look like. If you have already submitted 2.09 unit test and you were not happy with your score, you may also go back and revise your answers after watching this video and resubmit your test for a higher grade. So this is for English 2, the week of September 20th, 2021. And again, we're going to be talking about the short answer responses specifically for the 2.09 unit test that was due last week. Our objective today is you'll be able to revise your writing to improve clarity, development, organization, and style. We're going to do this first through a guided explanation, and then I will have you actually open up your test and revise, or just go ahead and create your original responses if you haven't submitted it yet. So we're going to work together to review the question and break down what it is that the question is asking. Then we will reread the passage and look at an exemplar answer. So an exemplar answer is just an example of a really good answer that you can use kind of as a guide. So the question that we're going to be looking at from 2.09 is, what is the effect of the author's use of foreshadowing in Secret in Slovakia? Use evidence from the text to support your response. Your response should be one complete paragraph. So I'm going to pause for a minute here, and we're going to look at a couple of things that I think are really important for us to understand. When we are looking at the question, you need to identify what is the question asking. In this case, what is the effect of the author's use of foreshadowing? So we have to know what foreshadowing is, and we have to understand the question is asking, what is the effect of foreshadowing? It's not asking for examples of foreshadowing, it's asking what effect does foreshadowing have in this story. And then again, something that we see all the time in these short answer responses, use evidence from the text to support your response. This is where we have to go back to the story. We have to find a quote or a piece of text that supports your answer. These questions are also asking for a fairly lengthy response. This question says your response should be one complete paragraph. So we're looking for 3 or 4 sentences minimum in these short answer responses, not just a one-sentence answer. So like we said on the previous slide, when we break down the question, we have to ask ourselves, what is the important part of the question that we need to answer? So in this particular question, it's what is the effect of foreshadowing in this story? Again, it's not asking just to give examples of foreshadowing. The question is asking us, what effect does that foreshadowing have in the story? So this is kind of a two-step process. You have to go back to the text and find where the author uses foreshadowing, but we can't stop there. We have to take it a step further and say, because the author used foreshadowing, it caused this effect throughout the text. And then again, we have to go back and use evidence to support our response. What do we need to know in order to be able to answer this question? Well, we need to know what foreshadowing is. So if there are words or terms in the question, or even in the text that you're not familiar with, it's always a good idea to look it up, okay? For this particular question, what is foreshadowing? That's something that we have to look up before we're able to answer the question. I will put it up here on the board for you in just a minute, because this is something that we would need to know. Okay, And then finally, how long does our answer need to be? This particular question tells us that our response should be one complete paragraph. So in this instance, we're looking for probably 3 to 4 sentences. Okay, let me move this up a little bit. There we go. 3 to 4 sentences for our answer here. So let's take a pause. I'm going to go and look up foreshadowing because I need to know what that means in order to answer the question. All right, so after looking up the term foreshadowing, I discovered what it actually means. So I'm going to put it up here on the board. And foreshadowing is to be a warning or an indication of a future event. So in this text, I'm looking for times where the author gives us a warning or an indication of something that's going to happen in the future. And then I have to tell how that evidence or how that foreshadowing affects the text. So let's look, before we respond and reread the passage, let's develop some kind of outline that we could use for what our response would look like. So we want to, of course, answer the question. Okay, the effect of foreshadowing. I can't type in real life here, guys. The effect of foreshadowing on the text is what? That's what I have to answer. Okay? And I have to prove it. I have to prove it by saying in the text, we see what? And I'm going to go pull that quote. Where can I find evidence of my answer in the text? And then the last part of my answer is going to be to explain it. And I'm going to use these transitional words like this shows that, this demonstrates, this tells us what. Okay, so that's what I want our answer to look like. I'm going to have 3 parts. I'm going to have my answer, I'm going to have my proof, and then I'm going to have my explanation. So that's what I'm looking for in kind of an outline of that answer. So let's look at the question, or let's look at the text. This is Secret in Slovakia. After 17 hours of travel, we had finally made it. It was 10 o'clock at night, and we were in Slovakia, standing in front of Great Aunt Gertrude's house, which stood at the end of a long, narrow street and looked to be made of ancient stone. The wind came whistling through the trees that surrounded the house in a way that reminded me of an eerie fairy tale that my grandmother told me when I was a child. In the dark, with its front windows and double-arched doors, the house looked as if it were about to eat us. 2 days later, when we left, I would look at the house in the daylight and think it was very charming. Right then, I wanted nothing more than to find the inside much less frightening than the outside. I was in Slovakia with my mother and uncle to prepare Aunt Gertrude's house to be sold. 2 years ago, when she became increasingly frail, she had come to the United States to live out her days close to the only family she had, my mother, my uncle, and their families. I had seen Aunt Gertrude more in the past 2 years than I had ever before in my life, and she could be terrifying, often wearing a mean scowl on her deeply lined face. She never had children of her own and worked as a governess when she was young, and although those children had to be my parents' age by now, I still felt bad for them. My grandmother had come to the United States when she and Gertrude were in their 20s, and Aunt Gertrude rarely spoke about herself, so we knew very little about her adult life. Although I never felt particularly close to Aunt Gertrude, it was comforting to know she was close by in her last years. Now that she was gone, we were apparently going to discover the secret she had been keeping from all of us. I'll never forget the last moments before she died. She knew the end was near, and she was saying her goodbyes to all of us. Then she turned to my mother, grasped her hand so tight that I saw surprise on my mother's face, and she said, "I'm sorry. You'll find out all about it I did what I thought was best. Forgive me. This was not the time to press Aunt Gertrude for details, and just a few minutes later, she died peacefully. Now we were at the house to gather her paperwork and retrieve some personal items that she had left behind. As we crossed the threshold, I realized that my wish about the inside of the house not being frightening would not be coming true. The furniture, all draped in sheets and lit only by the moonlight, looked like ghosts hovering in each room. It was so still we could hear each tick of the grandfather clock as we moved through the house. The three of us walked slowly and quietly down the wide hallway to the kitchen, as if we were afraid of waking someone. My uncle turned on a light switch as we walked into the kitchen, and the bulb instantly blew out, sending my mother and me into a momentary panic. We all composed ourselves and made our way to the library. Aunt Gertrude had directed us specifically to this room so that we could gather certain books and other items that she wanted to remain in the family. As we crept into the room, we all noticed it at once. On the desk, there was an old wooden box with a note on top in Aunt Gertrude's handwriting that read, "Forgive me." I had never asked my mother or uncle what they thought we might discover in Aunt Gertrude's house because I was certain that they would not know. Aunt Gertrude had always been such a distant, shadowy figure, even when she was living in the United States. Now we were about to find out what she had kept secret for years. My uncle opened the box and pulled out a stack of old papers. On the top was stationery that looked as if it were about 50 years old. The letterhead had a picture of a building with the words, "Bratislava School for Girls." The second paper in the stack was a letter from Aunt Gertrude addressed to the family. In the letter, she explained that she had been bequeathed a large sum of money when she was a young woman by one of the families for whom she had worked. Aunt Gertrude had used it to open a school for orphan girls in the city where she had grown up. As he read the letter, my uncle paused at the end of almost every sentence. It was all so much to take in. Aunt Gertrude explained that she knew many orphans as a child growing up in the city, and when she was given this money, she immediately knew what she would do with it. The letter said that her only fear was that the family would be angry with her for not sharing the money. We all looked at each other in disbelief. A woman we had all feared had sacrificed what could have been a luxurious life in order to help orphans in her homeland, and she had worried that we would be angry about it. A few days later, we returned home with the surprising news about Aunt Gertrude. The news made me regret not knowing her better while she was alive, but at least our family now knows what kind of generous person Aunt Gertrude really was. All right, so now that we've read the passage, let's look back at our outline of what we said we wanted to see in the answer. We have to answer the question that says the effect of foreshadowing in the text is what? Then we have to prove it by saying in the text we see what? We have to choose a quote, we have to choose something directly from the text that illustrates that. And then I have to explain it. So let's look at an exemplar response. This is an exceptional response to this particular question. Let's see if this exemplar response models after the outline that we created a couple of slides ago. This response says, the author uses foreshadowing in a subtle way to create a sense of mystery, with the foreshadowing being that their great aunt is a very closed-off person. Lines like, quote, "and she could be terrifying, often wearing a mean scowl on her deeply lined face," and, quote, "Aunt Gertrude rarely spoke about herself, so we knew very little about her life," gives off this vibe that she is really secluded to herself and that there is an air of mysteriousness surrounding her. At the end, though, it is revealed that she had accumulated a lot of money, so she opened an orphanage in her hometown. The reason she never talked about it is because she didn't want her kids to know that she invested it into an orphanage instead of using it to raise her family. The mysteriousness developed by the foreshadowing keeps the reader engaged throughout the story. So this response provides an answer to the question, okay? Answers the question, gives examples by quoting the text, and then explains her answer. She says the mysteriousness is developed, so the author uses foreshadowing to create a sense of mystery. She tells us what that foreshadowing is and gives us examples directly from the text, and then explains the answer by saying the mysteriousness developed by the foreshadowing keeps the reader engaged throughout the story. So that's an excellent example of how to answer that question. So what did this response do well? Did it answer the question? The answer is yes. It directly answered the question. This student used 1 to 2 pieces of text evidence. Yes, we had 2 different quotes throughout that answer. The student explains the link between the answer and the text evidence. The student includes a concluding sentence, and the student meets the length requirement for the prompt of 1 full paragraph. So that's just something that you can model your answer after. That's what it should look like. So for your 2.09 unit test, you may begin to work on revising that 2.09 unit test if you've already submitted it, or submitting your original submission if you haven't done it yet. When you're finished, you will resubmit it just like you submitted it the first time. You can just upload the new document with your revised answers. And of course, if you have any other questions or need help, you can always email me or come into office hours. But I hope looking at that question, breaking it down, looking at the text together, and then looking at how we would outline and formulate an answer to that short answer response question helps you kind of go back and revise and reshape some of your answers. So we only looked at question number 1, but you would follow that same process for questions 2 and 3. So you still want to answer the question, provide your proof or a quote from the text, and then offer an explanation. For 2.09, question number 2 asks for a 2-paragraph response. So make sure that you're noting question number 2 is asking for a longer response. It's actually worth more points as well. So question 1 is worth 10 points, question 2 is worth 20 points, and question 3 is worth 10. So question 2 is asking for a lengthier 2-paragraph response. You're getting more points for that as well. I hope this helps clarify that 2.09 assignment for you and helps you understand how you need to revise and reshape those answers. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.